So that's also why, I mean, the rankings came out and I don't really agree with them. I'll get into that in a second too. But this idea that Georgia now, because now the narrative, obviously Alabama lost, so people can't say it's Alabama, Georgia, and everybody else, but people still have this narrative about Georgia. Well, now it's Georgia and everybody else. And I don't know if that's necessarily true. Georgia's definitely number one in my rankings. But there, let me run down my rankings real quick. I was going to wait, but I think this is a good time. I would have, because I have a huge problem with the way we do rankings. One, my main problem is there's no clear criteria, right? NFL power rankings are very simple. Arizona is number one. Why? Because they're 5-0 now. And it doesn't matter if you think Buffalo's maybe a little better than them, right? You know, it's not about betting. It's not about betting odds. Maybe I would bet Tampa to beat Arizona. Maybe I would bet Kansas City even with Mahomes, even though they lost again. Maybe I think, you know what, I think they could beat Arizona. Well, it doesn't matter. Arizona's 5-0. Those other teams aren't. So they're number one. And I know college is a little bit different because you don't have as much parity, but I think among the Power 5, 90% of years, there's enough parity to honor wins, and you gotta punish teams for losing. So my rankings are sort of similar to what you have, but when the AP came out, Alabama only fell to number 5. And the only reason you can justify having Alabama at number 5 still is, well, I just think they're still really good. And that's not a bad argument for betting. If I was betting tomorrow, I probably would have Alabama probably beating almost everybody, right? The only team that I'd be scared to bet Alabama is probably still Georgia. But that's not how rankings should work. Preseason, yes. Preseason rankings should be all about who you think has the best roster, the best coaches, right? One thing I don't like about preseason rankings is having a team high because you're predicting. So I've heard a lot of, take Clemson for example. I've heard people say, well, I got Clemson number 2. I think they're really like the 5th best team, but they play in a weak conference and I expect them to go undefeated and make the championship, so I got them at number 2. Well, no, if you think Clemson on paper is the 5th or 6th best team, that's where you should rank them preseason. Now, once the season gets going and games start getting played, you have to just go on paper, right? I think the BCS was the best system of rankings. Now, we only got 2 teams in the championship game, right? I'm not saying I don't like the expansion of now allowing 4 teams, but the way the AP has ranked teams since playoff expansion, and then the way the playoff committee kind of came in with no real criteria, sometimes it's all about resume, sometimes it's all about deserving what you've accomplished. They try to have this middle ground, and you do have to have sort of a middle ground. But I think the BCS, with its computer mixed with AP, kind of had it right. It was like, look, you can't lose. And yes, the SEC deserves a lot of credit. And when it comes down to tiebreaker situations, these 2 teams have a very similar or same record. Now you can start jumping into real resume stuff, strength of schedule stuff. But to have, in this case, right, Alabama again, be number 5 when there's still some other really good one-loss teams out there, tell me why, in what world, Alabama should be in front of Penn State right now. How does that make sense? Again, the only argument you could make is, well, with my eye test and what I would bet my money on, I think Alabama's better than Penn State. Who cares? We are 7 weeks into the season, and what you've done on the field matters more. In what other sport do we have these sort of arguments in, right? Like I just said, in the NFL, you win your divisions, you do what you're supposed to do, you have a better record, you're going to be ranked ahead, you're going to the playoffs over that other team. That's just how it works. Baseball works that way. And don't give me the parity argument, because you can make that argument in any other sport as well. In baseball, some divisions and conferences are way stronger than others. In the NFL, last year the NFC East was garbage. Washington made the playoff. Did they have a winning record, or were they 500? Or they might have even had a losing record. You've seen teams with losing records make the playoffs because they're still the best team in their division. That's how the sport works. And a caution to the people that want the big expansion, you're not going to have it both ways. You're not going to have 12-team college football playoff expansion and then also have, oh, it's the best teams. No, with expansion comes just more structure and more criteria, and like this gets you into the playoff, period. There's not, so pick your poison. It goes both ways here. Anyway, what I'm saying is, in what world, in the way sports should work, can you have Alabama in front of Penn State? Who has Alabama beaten? Alabama has beaten Ole Miss. And that's not a bad win at all, right? That's probably their best win. They dominated that game. I've got Ole Miss in my rankings sitting around 16. Okay, so I guess from that standpoint, Alabama does have a slightly better win than Penn State. Than Penn State. Because Penn State's best win at this point is probably Auburn, who I have ranked like 26. Right? They've got the 2 losses. But Auburn has only lost to 2 really respectable teams at Penn State in the whiteout and now Georgia. So this 4-2 Auburn team should be one of the more respected 2-loss teams. Okay? But then you also got to look at wins. Penn State's other good win would be Wisconsin. Now, unfortunately, Wisconsin also has 2 losses, but they've got 2 respectable losses. Wisconsin is still a tough team to beat, although this probably isn't their year. No, sorry, Wisconsin has 3 losses now because Michigan also. So it's not a sexy ranked win anymore for Penn State or for Notre Dame, but we all know, we watch the sport, that's a good win. And now Penn State's only loss is to the number 2 team on the road when their quarterback went down. That's a better loss than Alabama's loss at A&M. Because A&M, while they played great and got that win over Alabama, who was A&M before they beat Alabama? They're an unranked team that doesn't have explosive offense. Defense wasn't playing up to the standard, right? A&M is still the team that lost to Mississippi State, lost to Arkansas, barely beat a mediocre Colorado team, or basically a bad Colorado team. Minnesota went in there and scored 5 times the amount of points on Colorado as A&M could, right? So let me run through my rankings real quick. I got Georgia 1, 6-0. Iowa number 2, 6-0. I got Oklahoma number 3, 6-0, right? Yeah, Oklahoma's been up and down, but I respect being undefeated in October, okay? And the Texas win was a good win for Oklahoma. And the way their quarterback switch happened, they're looking like a different team to me now. Now, I really want to see Oklahoma sustain this to keep them there, but I've got Oklahoma number 3. Guess who I have number 4? Michigan. 6-0, baby. Power 5. It's October. Oh, but they haven't looked as dominant. Well, they haven't lost. Okay? You got to treat these teams evenly. Okay? If Michigan had played all the teams Alabama had played and maybe looked like Michigan still, and then they just lost to, right? Michigan played Nebraska on the road this week. That was a tough game, right? They almost lost, but they won. Nebraska is not as good as Texas A&M, I don't think. But on paper, you can't say A&M is just 20 miles ahead of Nebraska. If Michigan would have lost to Nebraska this weekend, they would have dropped so far in the rankings. They would have been behind 2 lost teams. And maybe rightfully so. I'm not saying that doesn't make sense. But this is a bad loss for Alabama. This is the worst loss Nick Saban has ever had at Alabama since the dynasty got going. And they barely fall. All the 1-loss teams in the Power 5, most of them should be ranked ahead, right? So I'll keep going through my rankings. I got number 4, Michigan 6-0. Then I have Cincinnati. Because, Cincinnati has the one good win, but I've never been a big Group of 5 fan, right? I think, hey, that is where I really do get into the whole who you playing, who you scheduling, that type of stuff. But they have that win over Notre Dame, and I think that is a good win on the road. So I do have Cincinnati number 5 at 5-0. Then I go through my 1-loss teams, and I got Alabama at the bottom of them, right? I got Penn State number 6. I think of all the 1-loss good teams, right, which in that list is Penn State, Oregon, Ohio State, Bama, I feel like as of today, I got to put Bama at the bottom of that list based on sports, okay? Penn State's 5-1. Their only loss was at Iowa. And honestly, after rewatching all the games this weekend, Red River was awesome. The A&M game was awesome. But the real big juggernaut game was Iowa-Penn State. If you haven't watched that game, because maybe you're more of an SEC fan, maybe you just don't take Iowa seriously. Guys, watch this game. Put yourself in the mood of a game. That was a great game. Those teams are good. The football was not sloppy. Those defenses are legit. If those two teams had SEC logos, they'd both still be in the top 5. People would have said that was the game of the century. Oh, that was 2011 Bama LSU. That was, oh my goodness, right? Same when Georgia and Clemson played, they got that benefit of the doubt. Well, we've seen who Clemson is since then. So that game was not that. It's October. Iowa is 6-0. Penn State is 5-1. Penn State has some good wins. Now, if the Penn State offense was just a little bit better, I think Penn State would get more respect. But Penn State offense so far has done what they needed to. I don't know if Iowa wins this game if Sean Clifford, Penn State quarterback, doesn't go down. And Iowa, right in the beginning, you're like, well, they're getting a lot of turnovers, but that's not sustainable, right? Well, they've made it look pretty freaking sustainable. Indiana, week 1, they get like 2 or 3 pick sixes, and defense looks dominant. Against Iowa State, they get a bunch of interceptions. They force turnovers. That's when you're like, okay, well, is this sustainable or is this luck? Well, no. I watched the Maryland game 2 weeks ago. If you're thinking Ohio State looks great, Iowa destroyed Maryland just like Ohio State did this last weekend, right? And, Ohio State offense is coming along. And I'm not saying that they're not. But people are really starting to love Ohio State because of this Rutgers win and this Maryland win. Well, then you got to show that same love to Iowa. And Iowa's not being disrespected or anything. They are number 2 now. But it's kind of like they're 2 by default, right? The idea that they would ever be ranked ahead of Georgia is blasphemy. And I've got Georgia 1. I'm not saying they should be 1. But I don't think it's crazy. I think there's arguments you can make. I might not agree with them, but you can make little arguments that why shouldn't Iowa be 1? It's definitely not Georgia and everybody else, right? It's definitely not that. I'll get back to Georgia, Iowa in a second. Sorry, I'm bouncing all over with my rankings. I want to get through them. So, like I said, I got Penn State 6. I've got Oregon 7. Oh, Michael, but they have the bad loss. They do have a worse loss than Ohio State, who's also a 1-loss team, but the head-to-head matters to me more. Stanford's not some terrible team. Oregon was down their offensive coordinator in that game. That's huge, and the offense struggled in that game. That last drive, Stanford got extremely lucky. Now, I'm punished. A loss is a loss. You should be punished. But wins matter too. Oregon has a better win than Alabama, period. They won at Ohio State. People are starting to fall back in love with Ohio State, and maybe rightfully so. Oregon won at the Horseshoe. And then had, kind of a not a good loss, but it was at Stanford. It was in overtime. They didn't have their offensive coordinator. It's a bad loss. I'm punishing them for it. But to me, they've got to be ahead of Ohio State because of that head-to-head. Ohio State lost at home, and they never looked like they were going to win that game. Oregon was always ahead of them. Oregon didn't have to throw, right? Stanford beat Oregon because they kind of made Oregon throw the ball. And Anthony Brown, I don't know if he can get it done, right? He's not the type of quarterback that I want to put all my, eggs in that basket of, he's going to lead us down the field to win a game when it matters. I don't know if he's that guy. Well, he didn't even have to be that guy against Ohio State because Oregon just kind of scored when they wanted to. Oregon's defense played pretty good. Even though Oregon gave up explosive plays to Ohio State was never in that game, it felt like. And they were in the game, but they couldn't win the game. That's one of the best wins of anybody in my top 10 or in the top 10. That's one of the best wins anybody has, right? Because like I said, okay, so I got Oregon 7. Then I have Ohio State 8. Then I have Alabama at 9. I think they have to go behind those other 1-loss teams. How can Alabama be above Penn State, Oregon, and Ohio State right now? It doesn't make sense. Maybe you could have them above Ohio State because their loss was on the road to a team that played extremely well, A&M, where Ohio State's loss was at home, but Ohio State's loss was to a better team. I've got Oregon in the top 10. I don't have A&M there. I got A&M at like number 21, right? So then I've got Michigan State 10, Kentucky 11, Oklahoma State 12, and Wake Forest 13. Because those teams are undefeated. Yeah, now they haven't maybe played quite the competition yet. We'll see. And that's where it's like, okay, I understand maybe having Alabama get above those teams, even though they're undefeated. Because, again, you got to have that balance of, is this team better? But records matter in sports. Losing matters in sports. So, yeah, I'm not saying Alabama has to be number 15 right now behind every undefeated team. I'm not saying they have to be behind Wake Forest today. But to just give them the benefit of the doubt and say, well, I think they're really good. They're Alabama still, so I've got them number 5 above all these other one-loss teams with better resumes to this point. I don't agree with that. I can't do that. Then I got Arizona State, number 14, Notre Dame, 15, Ole Miss, 16, BYU, 17. These are my, other really good one-loss teams. And then, you start to get the list. I got Arkansas, 18, 4-2, Florida, 19, 4-2, NC State, 4-1, right? Then Texas A&M, 4-2. To top it off, I got SMU, number 22, Texas, number 23, Coastal Carolina, 24, 25, San Diego State, who's 5-0. And then I got Auburn just outside of that at 4-2. It's really hard to judge, when you get down there at the bottom. But that's what I've got. And let me get back to this whole Georgia-Iowa argument, Oklahoma, these teams where I don't agree with it's clearly Georgia and then everybody else. I think if Georgia and Iowa played, that would be a phenomenal game. A phenomenal game. And while I think Georgia's defense, I would give them the nod over Iowa. Iowa's got an incredible defense. I think Georgia has the best defense, followed by Iowa, followed by Penn State. I love all 3 of those defenses. They're awesome. Here's the thing, though. Georgia doesn't have the offense, at least not that I've seen yet, that really, really scares me. And here's another good example of taking both these last 2 weeks and learning from both of them when assessing different teams, right? What Georgia did to Arkansas was incredibly impressive, right? You can make the argument, look what Arkansas's offense is capable of. They ran it all over Texas. They threw it and ran it all over Ole Miss. 51 points they scored on Ole Miss a week after they couldn't score anything on Georgia. Georgia's defense is incredible. But what did the Georgia offense do to Arkansas? I mean, they dominated them. They kind of just ran the ball down their throat. They didn't need to throw it all around. Maybe they could have if they were forced to. But, they kind of just ran it down their throat. But look what Ole Miss did to Arkansas. Ole Miss lit up the Arkansas defense in a way that it didn't look like Georgia was capable of. So this idea that Georgia isn't vulnerable at all, I'm a defensive guy. I still love the mentality, defense wins championships. I believe in that. But college football has changed a lot. And you need to score, right? So Georgia plays really well when they have the lead, and this is my problem with Iowa. I think Georgia and Iowa are very similar, and I think Georgia's a better version of Iowa, where the Iowa offense, you don't trust them to come back, right? That's why I was surprised they came back and beat Penn State, because Iowa, to me, is not the type of team that plays from down by 2 touchdowns, right? When they're down 17-3, you're like, dang, and that's why I said, maybe if Penn State doesn't lose Sean Clifford, I don't know if Iowa comes back. Because as soon as Sean Clifford goes down, Iowa really just stacked the box. Penn State hasn't been the best deep threat team, but they're respectable. They've got some playmakers at receiver. Sean Clifford's good enough that, you give him chances, they will make some plays down the field. But when he went down, Iowa loaded the box even more and really put the pressure on Penn State. Penn State could not take any shots down the field. You're not running on Iowa, right? Iowa was able to slowly come back and win. And the Iowa offense does make plays when they need to in a lot of times. So Georgia and Iowa, to me, are a lot more similar than people give them credit for. I think the average person is like, oh, Georgia is beating Iowa by 21 points. I'm betting on Georgia 9 times out of 10. Where I think it's more like, maybe 6 out of 10 times Georgia's beating Iowa. I think that game's a lot closer. And then look at Georgia against an Oklahoma, Cincinnati, maybe Oregon, Ohio State, Alabama, right? If those teams have offensive firepower, right? Now, Georgia's defense is incredible, but those teams have offensive firepower. If those teams were able to, what if Georgia was down 17-3 like Iowa was? What if Georgia was down 17-3 against an Oklahoma, against a Penn State? Do they have the offense to go with their defense to get them out of those holes? I don't know. Now, maybe Georgia plays good in a defense that they never get in that hole. But Iowa has proven to me that even if they don't play their game perfectly, because Iowa is not meant to play from behind, but they came back and won a game from behind against a team I think is really good. So, let's be honest here. I don't know how we can sit here today and say, oh, Georgia is flawless, it's them and everybody else. No, to me, that's not true at all. And I love, when I'm sitting here at these rankings today, and I see Georgia 1, but to me, a Georgia team that is semi-vulnerable. Because I need to see more out of that offense. Now, JT Daniels hasn't even been healthy, right? And they've been winning with Bennett. So maybe this offense is capable of being phenomenal. And this offense doesn't need to be Ohio State or Oklahoma by any means. But I don't know. I've got some questions. If Georgia plays a team like an Iowa, maybe a Penn State, Alabama, and that team does a good job shutting down their run and says, you have to throw to beat us, you have to throw in tight windows, we just don't know if Georgia can do that yet. Maybe Georgia absolutely can. That's the one thing we haven't seen from them yet. Which, to their credit, it's because they're beating teams to a point where they don't need to. And we can only go off of what we've seen so far, right? And, again, Alabama is not out of this thing. They probably do what they always do, run the table from here on out. Saban almost needs a loss to rally his team. They come back. They go win the SEC championship game at 12-1. They're obviously in, right? But it does change the narrative a little bit. Because you don't just have these two SEC teams at the top that are on this collision course, and you feel like they're probably both making the playoff because they're going to get to that SEC title game undefeated. Again, a narrative I don't agree with, by the way, and I'll get to this in a minute. But that was kind of the narrative, right? And can anybody beat Bama? Well, someone did just beat Bama. And it wasn't Georgia. It wasn't a top 5 team. It was a Texas A&M team that could barely score against Colorado, lost to Mississippi State at home, and also lost to Arkansas, an Arkansas team that couldn't do crap against Georgia. And again, I think you got to compare head-to-heads. You got to look at what teams have done against similar opponents and stuff, but you can't go into it too much, right? Because some people get so deep, oh, well, Oregon beat Ohio State. Stanford beat Oregon. Or Stanford should be ranked above Ohio State. No, that's not how it works. Every week is a different week in college football. Obviously, A&M played at a completely different level this week against Alabama versus what they did against NC State. And we see it all the time.